If it pleases your honours, I am Mr. Hussain, defence counsel for Mr. Cvetkovic. Today, the prosecution has sought to pin liability on Mr. Sane Cvetkovic for specific charges you have in front of you. In particular, the prosecution itemized 11 counts, and today have attempted to convince your honours that two defendants, including Mr. Cvetkovic, were engaged in a joint criminal enterprise with a nefarious purpose of forcefully and forcibly transferring a civilian population, the execution of two men, and also persecuting these two previously stated women. Doubtless, your honours are aware that the prosecution's burden today is to prove beyond all reasonable doubt that Mr. Cvetkovic is guilty of these charges. In our respectful submission, the prosecution has not discharged this burden because doubt lingers. We submit that, firstly, the offence elements has not been successfully made out by the prosecution, and secondly, the evidence that you have heard today raises some very serious doubts that you ought to consider. Your honours are cognizant of the fact that in order to prove a joint criminal enterprise, as my learned friend has just elaborated upon, based on these facts today, it must be established that Mr. Cvetkovic was party to a common plan to execute some nefarious illegal criminal purpose. The prosecution has failed to establish these elements today. Instead, they chose to focus on a matter that was quite labored on and on and on without actually addressing any specific points. Defense for Boban have attempted to paint Mr. Cvetkovic as some Muslim hater, when in reality his first love was a Muslim. The reality, of course, is that as a mere sergeant, Mr. Cvetkovic was never high enough in the military hierarchy to be participant in any such plan that must have, of course, an inherent criminal purpose. Neither was he present, neither was he amongst Mr. Artukovic's inner circle. Mr. Artukovic has been established today, was clearly his superior, who in turn reported to a higher command. Both Mr. Cvetkovic today and Mr. Boban confirmed that as soldiers their clear and direct mandate was to secure the supply line against a real and present danger, the enemies. And this was always his belief. Today, your honours have heard about Mr. Cvetkovic. He talked about his philosophy as being a dutiful, a diligent, and competent soldier who seeks to help, to serve his country rather than harm. Now let us, for a moment, juxtapose him with his commander, Mr. Artukovic. Throughout today, the consistent narrative, the consistent adjective here to describe him is angry. His anger often got the better of him. Indeed, you saw him retaliate today in today's court session. He had a vendetta against the Bila, for they, after all, murdered his cousin. So, if at all there was any common plan, the chief architect would have been Mr. Artukovic, who consulted with his inner circle, who might have formed an inherent illegal intent which was separate from the army's normal military operations. Mr. Cvetkovic did not have the requisite mens rea of common purpose to convict him for crimes associated with a joint criminal enterprise. Now, let us pay a bit more attention to the credibility of Mr. Artukovic. Is he credible? Well, he's lied about ordering the execution of the men. He has no evidence to suggest that he actually followed up on anything. His evidence was so demonstrably discreditable and unreliable and full of contradictions you may think. Turning now to the star witness of the prosecution for Mr. Cvetkovic, Ms. Lagumjia, a woman who the prosecution have admitted has suffered mental trauma in the opening, indeed, today. Of course, we have to review the facts. Initially, in her statement, she claimed she was positive about the identity of her assailant. But upon closer scrutiny, as you saw today, she was confused. She couldn't answer basic questions, her age, her sister's age, when the sister died, full of contradictions. She admitted in her statement, and it is not insulting to say that, to recollect the fact that she said her memory had been affected by these traumatic incidents. And importantly, Mr. Cajtkovic was not recognized by any other witnesses here today. So despite her insistence as to how confident she is, the truth is she is not in the position to say with confidence who the man was. So doubt lingers. In conclusion,
could I ask you one
yes.
short question? You say no one else could identify him as far as I do understand, there were two ladies, one of them alive, the other one killed.
Yes.
Who else would have been there to identify Ms. Cajtkovic?
Your Honor, throughout today, it was asked of every other witness here whether they did see Mr. Cajtkovic assault these two women, and no one confirmed that. Your Honor,
yes, was there anyone who could possibly have confirmed that, being present at the event? I mean, if they would have asked me, I would have also said that I couldn't identify him because I was far away from that spot in 1992.
Your Honor raises a very important question, which in my submission feeds into the narrative that that Mr. Artukovic has painted here today. He said he did investigations. From who? Who gave him that additional information? As far as we're concerned, no one else here today, with the exception of Ms. Langum-Jia, has suggested that they were able to identify Mr. Cajtkovic assault these women. In his testimony, which has been consistent today, he has insisted that he did go and find, unfortunately, two women who he thought were dead, as it turned out.
Mr. Artukovic also said that on the basis of the investigation, on which he elaborated not that much, that Mr. Cajtkovic admitted guilt.
Your Honor may think that it's quite dubious that there would be evidence for the protected witness as to any disciplinary actions taken in the form of an order, whereas this is missing here. He said that he would normally take actions which were unsoldierly. This, in my submission, is quite serious. So why isn't there any evidence of this? In my submission, the answer is because it's a complete fabrication. There was no investigation because it never happened in our submission.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Your Honor, make no mistake here today that somebody did Ms. Langum-Jia and her sister wrong. But Your Honors cannot reasonably conclude, beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt, that that somebody was in fact Mr. Cajtkovic. In conclusion, whilst doubt lingers in this prosecution case, I have no doubt, Your Honors, that you will reach the right verdict that Mr. Cajtkovic is not guilty.
Thank you.